I want to tell you about a book that kept me awake for 2 nights this week as I read it. It's one of those you can't put down books. It was a journey of horror, of sadism and perversion, a story of brutality and death. It is the story of a woman who wrestled with the devil and won.
Joining me now from Victoria is Michelle Smith, a one-time victim of abuse by a satanic cult, and Dr. Lawrence Pasder, the psychiatrist who helped her come to terms with that nightmare. They are co-authors of the book Michelle Remembers.
The book is called Michelle Remembers. The authors are Michelle Smith and Lawrence Pasder, MD, who, acting as a psychiatrist, distracted from her bizarre childhood memories of Satan, which have shocked many people.
Michelle Smith created a sensation with her story of abuse at the hands of a satanic cult. This was the first publicized account of such rituals.
Now, you mentioned evidence which proved some of the early things you feel that happened to her as a small child in Victoria, BC.
I have to say that the evidence is clear that this came from an experience that Michelle had.
Michelle, can I ask you what it was that, after 4 years of therapy and this deep state of consciousness, that came out of your mind?
Basically, what I remembered was a 14-month period of my life at age 5, where I was given to a group of people whom at first I wasn't aware of what they were doing other than to a child. They were adults doing things I couldn't understand and that frightened me. They would put me in cages. They would sacrifice animals. They would have a lot of candles and chanting and bizarre things I had never seen.
Eating feces and orgies and dismembering fetuses. These were things that you experienced.
That's right.
You know, when you say something like that, that's alarming. I mean, people get terrified by this sort of thing. I mean, are they rightfully terrified?
I think that today that it's very, very wise to take a good hard look at where you place your children and to whose care you place your child.
I have been interested in the satanic panic for years. I researched it for years. And once I read Michelle Remembers, I could not get it out of my head. I did a 5-part series on Michelle Remembers. To me, it was important to present a discussion about it to people because this book has helped shape the world we now live in and whose contents we have to have some understanding of if we're going to know how we got here. So I think of Michelle Remembers as the patient zero of the satanic panic. The book begins when Michelle is in the hospital following a miscarriage, and Dr. Pasder comes because he, in the past, has worked as her therapist, and she tells him about a dream where there's an itchy spot on her hand. She scratches it, and then countless tiny spiders come surging forth, and she's extremely upset by this dream. And so he decides, based on this, that it's time for them to return to therapy.
What went on in your childhood that you discovered?
What basically I began to remember was a series of events that stretched out over about a 14-month period in my life.
Is this through hypnosis, Doctor?
Actually, it's beyond hypnosis. It's a method that Michelle had devised to go deep into her depths.
How had you devised this technique yourself, Michelle?
It just came about in the atmosphere of Dr. Pastor saying to me, just go where you have to go. I'll be there with you. I could then shut my eyes and through breathing very deeply, go way down inside. It felt very much like falling over backwards into the dark. And that's where I began to find the memories.
Side A, November 1976. Let it come as much as you can. Don't catch it if you can. So it'll be what it was.
I couldn't get away. No one was going to take her. Anyone they didn't take care. I was even standing there. And I remember I tried to crawl inside the mirror.
The first thing I remembered was a night when a group of people were gathered to do, I didn't know what. They were doing dances that were not like the dances I was used to. They had the walls draped in black. They had set up candles. My mother was present, but not in the ceremony, not in the ritual. She wasn't involved in that. Her position seemed to be one of giving me to this group. They were dedicated to doing a lot of seriously frightening kind of things. And they sacrificed animals. And they used fetuses of babies in their ceremonies.
I don't know what that blob is. And it was all red.
Incredible story. Tell me about Michelle and what, in fact, you believe happened to her as a small child.
Well, I have to back up a little bit. I knew Michelle very well through 4 years of therapy, intensive therapy, and there was no evidence of any of this kind of material present, but I knew her personality and everything. When she came to me a year after it had been discontinued and went into a very deep level of consciousness and began to relive, essentially, to see, to hear, to feel, and to tell me in detail these events for 14 months of what happened to her as a child, it was very difficult for me to decide where it was coming from.
Victoria was very small in the 1950s. I mean, the population was 70,000, that's it. It was safe, it was quiet. Church is the oldest, and then Michelle is the middle child, and I came along 5 years later. Tertia was pretty. Michelle was kind of fuddy-duddy. I was gorgeous. But Michelle and I were always getting into trouble. I think that's because we had such an up-and-down childhood. My mom, she didn't have an easy life, raising 3 girls on her own. My dad was in and out. You know, he was an alcoholic, and he had a gambling problem, so. When you have a husband that's an alcoholic, you don't have friends. You just don't. So Mom spent a very lonely life. My sisters talk about it now, and they always said, well, she would drink. And I said, you know, if I had 3 young girls and I sat down in the evening and had a cold beer, you know, I wouldn't classify that as drinking. You know, she had a lot on her plate. We moved 8 or 9 times in 10 years because of Dad. Dad was quite violent. You know, what always happened, Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, we would all end up in a hotel somewhere because the police would have to come and take us because Dad would start to terrorize and destroy the house, you know, beat my mom up. That was my childhood. I just assumed that's what everybody did. Got drunk and had fights, you know.
You had dead kittens thrown at you when you were lying in an open grave. You were placed inside a replica of Lucifer and tortured and prodded. Where were your parents in all this?
My mother was there sporadically. She seemed to be one of these types of people that gets involved in something, doesn't quite realize what they've gotten involved in, and then is in over their head and can't do anything about it.
The story is called Michelle Remembers. I've been talking to the authors, Michelle Smith herself and Lawrence Pastor, MD. It kept me awake all night. Thank you.
Larry liked the limelight. You know, everybody liked him, and he liked being liked. And Michelle wasn't like that. Michelle is like a Puritan. You know, no off-color jokes, and not really any swearing, and no alcohol. But Michelle is a caring, loving, gentle person who cares about the whole world. I worked with them for about a year and a half, and I only did it because I love typing. Larry had recorded everything that Michelle said in her reliving process.
Side A, around November 1976.
He took his reel-to-reels, put it all onto cassettes, and I went through the whole 14 months from the beginning to the end and filled in as much missing words and sounds as I could. And so what Larry did was he clipped out, you know, excerpts of the typing, and he would put that and then put his own writing underneath it, and then he'd give it to me, and I'd type it all and send it off to the publisher.
I was so frightened, but I don't like doing anything.
I don't understand what you mean.
I know what I mean, but it's all screwed up in my mind. I'll try and tell it the way it was. Maybe it'll make some sense.
To be 100% honest with you, I listened to all the tapes, and I believe that something happened to Michelle. There isn't much doubt in my mind. Something definitely happened to her. And I do believe it was a group of Satanists. And they had her for those 14 months.
It's awful! What's going on? It's like going around in circles like a top, and there's spiders, and I just wanted to stay alive.
As they get deeper into these memories of satanic ritual abuse, Michelle learns that her mother is not merely dabbling in this social scene. She gave Michelle to the Satanists because she is a Satanist. She belongs to these people.
My mother! She almost to keep me quiet. And get out by
And essentially the bulk of Michelle Remembers is long descriptions of a young child being mercilessly tortured.
I'm sorry if I've bothered you lately. I needed you. I keep remembering more things.
Dr. Pastor and Michelle are spending more and more time together. The sessions are getting up to 6 hours long. It's becoming both of their worlds, and yet, surprisingly, each of them is going home to a spouse each night. Michelle to her husband, Doug, and Dr. Pastor to his wife, Mary Lynn.
I met Larry at Michelle's wedding when she was getting married to Doug Smith. She loved Doug. They were happy, you know. He was a kind person. Michelle had a huge imagination. She always created things. She was very creative. So she had made her wedding dress, and she'd made her husband's suit. But the wedding, I remember Larry coming in, and I thought it was odd that a psychiatrist would show up at a wedding of a patient. But there must have been a connection between Michelle and him.
Well, I was married to Larry Pastor. We met when I was 13 and he was 17, and we married in 1961 when he graduated from medicine, and I had graduated from nursing. Well, he was always lots of fun and always very happy and cheerful and very charming. My mom said he could charm the birds right out of the trees, and he collected friends like a dog collected fleas.
My dad was really religious, and we went to church every Sunday. He was very much like, Catholic Church is the only church. But with my dad, like, I was his princess, basically, daddy's little girl. So I was always really, really tight with my dad. Like, I knew he was a psychiatrist. You know, I think that's one of the reasons why I really looked up to him, because like a psychiatrist was sort of seen as somebody that was kind of all-knowing and experts in human behavior kind of thing.
You're a conventional medical psychiatrist.
Absolutely.
How would you describe what was done mentally and physically?
It was a very carefully organized assault on Michelle on a physical, emotional, intellectual, and finally on a spiritual level. Very organized, very sophisticated.
Who were these people?
Well, they're a secret organization, they're a secret society. A secret society does not reveal the identity of the people or the ways of their practices. I was familiar with this type of society firsthand in Africa, practicing general medicine there. And if one of the members of that society revealed who he was killed instantly.
Larry had a camera when we were in Nigeria for taking 16 millimeter. He liked to record things, and he had all the latest photographic equipment, recording equipment, everything like that. He loved doing that.
Larry was a character, and he told these stories of Africa. And he had some run-ins with nuns down there. Nuns kept telling him that he was evil, and he was full of voodoo, and he should leave.
There were strange things there. It was a completely different culture. Very, very different. He did take some pictures of this group dancing around, and it was like as if they were in a possession state. He went in there and took those pictures of two big-wooden masks. And he really liked that sort of thing. He seemed to be very fascinated with it and just kind of drawn to that.
Well, I had worked in Africa and done a lot of work in transcultural psychiatry, so I was familiar with cults. And the degree of sophistication and organization that these people were using on Michelle told me that they were a serious cult indeed.
But they believe in the other god, the devil, right?
The devil. They worship the devil to bring down anything good that they know about.
How do they do this, Michelle? What rituals? Does the devil appear? Is that the idea?
Well, that is one of their intents, of course, is to summon a presence.
And you quote, the devil always talks in rhyme.
This is historically a fact that was brought out to us by the priest who we had to call in to help us understand what we were experiencing.
But I'll be back. You wait and see. I'll be back to take the world for me. You heard this, Michelle?
Yes. It was serious.
Father Guy said that Michelle could never know the symbology of what she was saying. Like mostly when Satan comes out of the fire and he speaks in rhymes. Father Guy was the priest at the Catholic Church that Larry and Michelle went to. And so he helped Michelle to understand what she's seeing and what's happening in that reliving process.
Michelle is saved by the timely intervention of the Virgin Mary. What was that referring to?
I was literally being frightened to death. At that moment, when I think I was dying, a very soft white light came and enveloped me, much like the feeling of being padded with cotton batton. And out of that, a woman came and stood beside me and took a hold of my hand, identified herself as ma mère, and basically told me to hang on, to help me understand the situation I was in and how to get through it.
Ma mère?
Ma mère.
The Virgin Mary.
That's right.
Mother Mary, they referred to her as ma mère, visited Michelle and talked to her in French. She helped to keep her going. Father Guy felt concerned about it enough that he took Larry and Michelle over to his bishop, which was Bishop Remy DeRue at the time. And Bishop Remy DeRue decided that her memories had enough import that they needed to go to Rome and tell the Pope this. And so they did. Larry and Michelle and Bishop Remy DeRue went there, and they did get to see the Pope. And they did tell him Michelle's memories.
It sounds like Dante's Inferno, hundreds of mutilated corpses. Now, you saw this. Now, you placed this in the hands of the Catholic Church.
That's right.
The entire tapes were transcribed with a great deal of time and effort. There's some 1.5 million words, and these are presently in the hands of the Church for their study.
And so, the Vatican still has some pronouncements to make upon this.
Very much so, and
Yes.
they take it very seriously.
It was October in 1980. As soon as the book came out, Larry and Michelle started this big publicity tour.
She was traveling all over the place with this whole book tour, and we didn't think it'd really get as big as it did, but then it just, I don't know how it did, it just blew up.
I had a ton of articles from all the papers and everywhere that they went.
Michelle and Larry were famous. They were famous. Everybody was talking about it. I mean, in the newspapers in San Francisco and Houston. She was in Seattle, Dallas, and New York. She was everywhere. I mean, they just went right across the whole country. And when they were on the book tours, they stayed in all these really fancy hotels. They had limousines. And I lived in San Francisco, and they came down on one of the book tours. And I mean, we had fun. I mean, we had some wonderful dinners. And they wined and dined whoever they're with. I know they got $245,000 US advance for the book.
And I know it was translated into a bunch of languages other than just English. So I know the book must have sold a lot of copies.
The book's already a big bestseller. You wrote it. You wrote it.
We wrote it together.
But at that time, I had to have surgery. And so I had just come out of surgery. I was lying there and I was really groggy. And I looked up at the TV and all of a sudden there was my sister. And it was like, oh my God.
I, Michelle Smith, was turned over by my mother at the age of 5 to a group of practicing Satanists who for the next year held me captive and abused me both mentally and physically as part of a demonic ritual called the Feast of the Beast. After my ordeal, I lived normally and happily until 1976, when a strange sense of unease led me to seek psychiatric help. All the terrifying memories that were buried for so long began to surface and were recorded by my doctor, Lawrence Pasder. And Dr. Pasder and I have told my story in a book called Michelle Remembers.
At first I thought I was imagining it, I was hallucinating. I thought I was like, man, that morphine must be really good.
When you relived these things, was this just in your head? The reliving?
No, this took place, the reliving itself, yes, this was in my head.
It was just too strange. And she told the whole story. So who's the person that was turned over to a satanic cult and written a book?
The votes are all in. Now we're going to find out which of these ladies, in fact, did survive this demonic possession. And we're going to, who better to pick her out than the co-author of her book, Dr. Lawrence Pasder. Doctor, come down and pick out Michelle, if you would, please.
And of course, she stood up, and it was like, I can't believe this. I think I called her and said, I can't believe it. I just saw you on TV.
Can you squeeze in there? Are you comfortable?
Yes, indeed.
Doctor, before we go on, I'd like to ask, is there any misinformation that emerged from this particular spot that you'd like to clear up?
Well, one of the important things is the journey to the Vatican was to bring the information. Michelle had seen some special presences, Ma Mère, who is thought to be the Mother of God.
The book came out in 1980, and I heard about it almost immediately because I was the first Wiccan priest in law enforcement. It was a very, very popular book. It still is in some circles. And she's all over North America in years following the publishing of that book, in front of police audiences, in front of church audiences, in front of community audiences. And they're both being seen as an expert.
I knew that it needed to be shared. It's the average person that with this kind of information, maybe we can make some wiser decisions about the kinds of things that go on. Maybe we won't get so easily pulled into cults.
She was everywhere. They were plugging everything. That's what they did for at least 2 years. And he was all of a sudden being asked to come and talk, because apparently now he was the guru of being able to decipher when a child has been abused. So that's when they started the speaking tours for the psychiatric conventions.
In 1981, there was an American Psychiatric Association annual meeting, and Pazder talked about the content of Michelle Remembers, and he started generalizing that there was this phenomenon, you know, beyond that particular story, that there was a phenomenon called satanic ritual abuse.
Satanic ritual abuse was a theory that people took as a fact, that there's a satanic conspiracy and there are children who are kidnapped or stolen and sacrificed.
Children are involved in graveyards and crematoria, in funeral parlors, because one of the primary focuses of these people is death. Everything is attempted to be destroyed and killed in that child, and in society, everything of goodness.
I'm Gordon Coulter. For many years, I served as a law enforcement officer. Today, it's my privilege to host this program on a little-known area in law enforcement. It's the area of satanic cults.
People would come in and they'd be paid to give these seminars to the police, or particularly the mental health professions. There were just all kinds of seminars, and you know, the problem was that you could get credits for these and they get their little certificate. Now they know all about satanic ritual abuse.
A few months ago, Chicago played host to a conference featuring ritual abuse.
One thing that's super important to remember, I think the field is forgetting, is these people come from cults.
Like-minded social workers and therapists eagerly noted the latest on the satanic threat. Police are also being taught how to spot Satan.
I do lectures throughout the country. In fact, I was in Canada, did a presentation for about 150 multi-agency personnel up there.
We called them Cops for Christ, people who had their own agenda, and they created these seminars and these materials and presented as actual scientific, confirmed fact.
There was an enormous amount of time spent dragging police into conferences to be taught how to investigate this stuff. All of that can be directly traced back to the Pazder's book and others, you know. That's what fueled that. That's what made that happen.
Pazder said that it's very widespread, and he pretty much validated that claim that satanic ritual abuse is a real concern. You know, people panic over this stuff.
Michelle and Larry were always talking all the time in Victoria, in the church, explaining satanic cults. And that's when someone said that the child was going to be stolen from the hospital, and it caused major havoc.
We've stepped up our extra security staff itself, and we've taken other certain precautions within the hospital that I can't discuss.
It was in the paper that Satanists were going to take a baby from the nursery. People were really alarmed. They were really upset.
The patrol guards seem to be wandering around the halls constantly. I've been up at times during the night and seen them.
Dr. Lawrence Pazder, who works out of this Victoria medical building, expressed concern the Satanist threat hadn't been checked thoroughly enough and denied any connection between it and his book, the bestseller Michelle Remembers.
People get caught up in it. It was like a snowball, you know, the more it got, the bigger it got. And it was a hot topic.
Up until 1983,
I was not aware of any of these cases. And then it just began to grow and grow and grow, and I kept hearing about more and more of these cases. And I'd say, man, this is some weird stuff. This is some really serious, heavy-duty stuff here. I didn't know what to call it. I didn't say, wow, that's satanic ritual abuse. I just heard people start to refer to these kinds of cases as satanic ritual abuse. And it touched a nerve. Satanic, I knew those people were involved in all this stuff. And ritual, oh yeah, what's that? That sounds sinister and evil.
And in Quantico, Virginia, Special Agent Kenneth Lanning of the FBI.
I became an FBI agent in 1970, and I was a regular FBI agent for 10 years. Eventually, I was assigned to the FBI Behavioral Science Unit, and I became the Bureau's expert on Satanism, the occult, cults, the whole package.
Special Agent Lanning, I'm going to ask you to deal first with the belief, which is quite widespread out there now, that there are just too many people telling too many stories that all sound the same for this not to be true.
Well, it's very interesting that argument, the fact that there's so many people telling the same story so often.
As I began to respond to these cases, I started out with an open mind. And I kind of thought that this had to be going on, because why would these people be saying it if it didn't happen? Pretty soon, somebody mentions Dr. Posner and the book Michelle Remembers. So I start to hear them getting involved. And the number of cases that I were consulting on in this area just began to grow. And then somebody called me up and told me about the McMartin daycare case.
The McMartin case was one of these preschool type of cases, the daycare cases, and all of these kids were ended up making these accusations about things that supposedly happened at a preschool in Manhattan Beach, California.
41 youngsters over a 6-year period had not just been sexually molested, but had also been forced to participate in satanic rites. There were also charges that to keep the children quiet, animals had been mutilated before their eyes.
They're remembering being abused in satanic rituals. They're remembering having to kill animals and breed babies and kill those babies and drink blood and all kinds of pretty wild and bizarre things.
The defendants faced more than 300 counts of sodomy, rape, and oral copulation. The evidence of abuse was largely developed by social worker Key McFarland, who used puppets to get the children who were between the ages of 2 and 6 to reveal what had happened.
Children's Institute International, which was a group that was involved in trying to get disclosures from children from the McMartin daycare case, decided to bring down Lawrence and Michelle as consultants to assist in the process. So they were directly involved in getting these disclosures and recovering memories.
Michelle Smith, what are the goals of these cults?
They want to possess the soul of the child. It's not just they want to capture them physically, but they want to have the child theirs.
And these are people whose families are either involved in these cults or who, because of because of some connection, fell into their hands.
Or through such vehicles as daycare centers where they have access to the child.
They went down to the States for the McMartin trial. And I know Michelle spent a lot of time with the kids, because that's what she would talk to me about, was the kids and how she related to the kids and helped the kids, remembering, reliving what had happened to them.
The mother of 2 children who admitted that they were severely abused while at the McMartin school agreed to talk to us on camera.
What actually happened to your 2 children?
They were tied up, sodomized. They were taken off the premises. They were threatened by watching animals being slaughtered. They were sold for prostitution.
People wanted to validate what children were saying. And the problem is, if you can't believe everything that the child says, what can you believe? How do you decide what happened, what didn't happen, what may have happened? Maybe the child misremembered it, maybe it's distorted, maybe the child didn't understand. But I would estimate that as time went on, during that time from 83 to maybe the late 80s, I consulted on hundreds and hundreds of these cases.
How alarmist would you be about how we should be dealing with this problem and how widespread it is?
It's widespread. It's across North America. We've had reports of it in every province and in every state. It isn't just in California or just on the West Coast here.
As the daycare cases erupted, which started in about 83, 84, there were police who were investigating these cases and prosecutors who were deciding to take them to trial, who were using Michelle Remembers as a kind of a checklist to develop cases, which meant that they would try to come up with questions based on what had happened to Michelle to ask the children. Michelle Remembers actually led to this panic over children being endangered. People panic over this stuff. They panic because they think that this is the end of the world.
It's known as the satanic panic from the 1980s and 90s. This stuff just spreads like wildfire. And as an FBI agent, I could step back and see cases from all over the United States and eventually all over the Western industrialized world.
Police officers all over North America went out looking for this stuff and prosecuted people. The satanic panic was picking up steam and it started to spread out and affect more people. It just went viral. And all of this was started by this book.
Victoria was a great city. Growing up here was so much fun. It was happy. It was fabulous. I was really lucky. You know, my dad had a great sense of humor. He also had like a bit of a twinkle in his eye. And sometimes at Christmas, all the family would come over and there's a ukulele my dad would play and my mom would sing. And they were just so happy singing along together. Those were good memories. But that was before the book.
Before I started on this book, I was at home and I was sitting there watching that show. Sybil was on TV.
Sybil. Oh. Please don't touch me. It hurts.
Sybil is about a woman who goes into therapy and she ends up in extreme therapy, like 5 times a week. And she gradually remembers really horrific, sadistic sexual abuse and torture by her mother. The book came out in 1973, and it was just like this instant, wild success. And then it was made into a made-for-TV movie in 1976. And I think about like 1/5 of the American population watched that.
He said, I want to do the same thing. And he said, I don't want to be just an ordinary psychiatrist. I want to be famous. And he said, I've got a patient just like that. And that's when he phoned her and gave her the phone number. And that's when it started. It just took off from there.
The phone started ringing in our house constantly. And it was usually really late at night. You know, to have a patient calling all the time was just unusual. No patient had ever called before.
When she got the phone number, she didn't stop phoning. She'd phone several times a day. When he came in the door, I would watch the clock. And sometimes it would get to maybe about 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then the phone would ring. And so I thought if we went to Mexico for Christmas, that he'd be able to distance himself in a more realistic way. But she just phoned and phoned and phoned and phoned and phoned. And he did believe her. There's no 2 ways about it. He believed everything.
The big change was that trip. And when they came back, I mean, all hell broke loose. Michelle was like showing up at all these different things behind us and following us. And it was frightening.
We went to Edmonton to a wedding. And she followed us all the way, and I cried all the way because there she was right behind us. This patient was everywhere.
Are you okay? I care about you too, you know, in all of this. I don't just care about me and my problem. You're not just a psychiatrist to me.
We thought this was the story that she used to get his full attention. It had him wrapped around her finger, no question. You know, she was always there, always reaching into our house with the phone, showing up at the doorstep. That was the Michelle we knew before the book. To us, she was like this stalker. Although I think he saw her differently than we did, definitely.
I felt that she was deeply in love with him. She was very protective of him, and, you know, all of us that did the typing, we all felt the same way, that she just wanted Larry to herself.
Essentially, this has become a relationship where the boundaries that exist between doctor and patient are no longer there, and Dr. Pazder and Michelle are first holding hands. He's then sometimes placing a hand on top of her head, and gradually they move from the couch to a rubber mat he has on the floor so that they can both lie on the floor together, their bodies touching. And according to this book, this is very necessary for the therapeutic experience. She's experiencing so much pain, she's in so much distress that she needs to be held in order to continue remembering.
You know, around that time, my dad started sort of disappearing quite a bit, and we didn't know where he was. And my mom didn't know where he was.
I just knew all these weird things were going on, and he was making a lot of effort to keep it secret. So I started asking around, and I found out Father Guy was involved with it. Larry had all tape recorders and all kinds of equipment. So I phoned and recorded Father Guy.
Hello?
Father Guy?
Hello, it's Mama Pastor here.
Yes, I know.
I was wondering, do you know when this book is going to be finished?
Many more months.
Many more months?
Oh, I believe so.
Father Guy, I really don't see what the importance of this is.
It would be very important.
For what?
Well, I believe for many people to learn about God and the church and everything.
And what do you think will happen?
Well, I think it will be a big explosion.
A big explosion? What?
Well, explosion of people will be shocked.
Why should they be shocked?
Father Guy said many people are going to be killed and many people are going to be saved, and, you know, there was something wrong up there. And Father Guy told me that they were going to make $1 million from the book, and there was a lot of money involved. So we went to see the Bishop Rebbe DeRue and said, you know, stop supporting this. But I didn't realize he went to Rome with him. I didn't realize that he was so mixed up in it until the book came out. But they obviously were all believing all of this. They were all for it. But I can't understand why anybody would believe it. I don't know why these people would follow such a stupid book.
One of the first things that came out after the book came out was the article in People magazine. And there she is lying on this couch and she's got her top off. And why would you give that picture in the first place to a magazine? Like, you've got a wife back home. You're really going to get shit for this.
That was heartbreaking to think that he would do that, you know. So I realized that there was no hope for me, that's where his affection was.
Michelle was still married to Doug. He had a good job. You know, Michelle got to stay home and do what she wanted to do. But they had a really hard divorce. Michelle wanted everything her way, and he did not see it coming at all.
When that book came out, it was really rotten. And it was so hurtful to see my mom at that time. She was in bed and she was like destroyed. My dad was her first boyfriend. They had just been together like her whole life. That's the only person she knew. He definitely, he broke her heart. And yeah, no, he wasn't the same with me at all. He wasn't friendly, he wasn't joking. He kind of didn't have that same look. There wasn't that twinkle. There's just a lot of sadness.
I got so upset that I just went down and filed for a divorce. I forget it. Forget it. No way.
Now, Michelle Smith, you survived a year of abuse by one of these cults when you were 5 years old. When you first talked about these things, I mean, did people think this was a fantasy, that you'd made this all up? It was such hocus pocus that it couldn't possibly have happened?
Well, I was one of the first to stand up and start to recount these kinds of things and to bring it publicly. And I think people are so uncomfortable and so afraid of this whole subject that, yes, I experienced a lot of the uncomfortableness, but what I also experienced was a tremendous number of people saying, this is true.
I'm a cynical person who spent 30 years in law enforcement. I assume that people are lying unless I know otherwise. But a lot of therapists have an opposite bias. They assume that everybody's telling the truth unless they know otherwise. And actually, this becomes a huge aspect to these allegations of satanic ritual abuse, particularly with what's called the adult survivors, and that's what Michelle would be. The things in the adult survivor cases, the stuff was even more weird than it was in the younger kids at the daycare centers.
Bonnie, you were made pregnant when you were 11 years old?
Yes. That child was sacrificed within the cult when she was about 6 months old.
Sacrificed how?
By being stabbed, and I was coerced into doing the act myself with my own child.
The police never found out about this?
The groups are extremely careful to cover up all evidence through using crematoriums and things like that. At least that's how I understand it.
Adult survivors are where you have an adult who goes into therapy without any memories of horrific abuse and comes out with all of these allegedly repressed and recovered trauma memories. That was a kind of altogether different thing. This wasn't just a little kid and a fantasy.
And you would have patients who had essentially the Michelle experience, where suddenly you were logging enough hours on the couch in the depths to qualify as a full-time job, and where a doctor who you trust is telling you if there's anything wrong with you, it was a result of sexual abuse that you had forgotten. And probably satanic abuse, because apparently there's a lot of that, and you can read about it in this book that was a bestseller. We have so many cases that essentially are the fruit of this tree that Michelle and Larry planted.
There are therapists all over the country today, many of them that are not really qualified to be therapists, that are passing on these stories.
They were salesmen. They were going around the country selling fear of Satan, fear of satanic cults, and they made a living out of it.
Her therapy, 13 months of inpatient work for misdiagnosed satanic, ritualistic, everything. Her therapy, over $1,300,000 for her. Then they got both of her teenage daughters in. One daughter went in for 11 months of inpatient therapy.
I think it's very clear that the therapists saw the opportunity to make some money off of these wild accusations and stories. This wouldn't have happened had it not been for the therapists who compromised their ethics and encouraged their patients to elaborate further and further.
They cut us and made us sign our name in blood in the Satanic Bible. That was the first ritual that I remember.
I was informed that my parents were in the occult.
She claimed that we had a pizza delivery boy come to our home. We cut him up, grilled him, and ate him.
I said, I know what you did. You're the ringleader of this cult, and I know you murdered babies. And I know you made me murder babies and eat babies, and I know just what you are. I know you for the Satanist that you are.
And Sally, most of these women don't come forward until their mid-30s after 5 to 7 years.
This is not a case in which someone has repressed memory.
This is a case
that is totally ongoing.
I would run into the adult survivors on like the Sally show, and so many different kinds of people, including educated people, believed that this was happening. And if you didn't believe it, you were suspect, I mean, at best, of not caring about children, and at worst, that you are a Satanist.
Are you accusing me of being a Satanist? Yes or no?
You're acting like one.
Say it, yes or no.
I'm saying you're acting like a Satanist right now.
Some people suggested that what they thought was causing Satanism was heavy metal music. And some of the people who were trying to investigate this stuff, they thought they were doing a good thing.
How often do you find heavy metal music indicators at the scene of a crime involving satanic worship?
Probably about 35–40% of calls.
Regularly, then?
Yes.
At the same time, there was kind of a, I guess you'd call it a rumor, although it got picked up by the press and it was taken as absolutely as fact, to the effect that you know, thousands and thousands of children were missing. Thousands. You know, then the next question is, well, why? I mean, who's taking them? Supposedly, the Satanists were taking the children.
I believe that they do. We can't prove that they do. But as a law enforcement officer, I question 2 million children missing in the United States, knowing that many, many of those are not runaways.
They were saying 2 million children are sacrificed every year in the United States. 3.71 million children are born every year in the States. You're telling me that 54% of the children born are all kidnapped and sacrificed? Really? Like, no evidence of that, folks.
Hard evidence is difficult to find because if a child is sacrificed, that child's body isn't going to be left. If it's an Orthodox satanic cult, they're going to burn the body and they're going to eat it during ceremony, so they'll leave no evidence around.
The proof that we have had disappears.
What proof has disappeared that we had?
Okay, a good example is I had baby wax.
What's baby wax?
Wax from a baby was burned, a baby that was burned, and the wax was made into a candle of a baby wax. It's a very important thing in the cult.
They make candles out of babies.
It was part of the zeitgeist. There was just a complete lack of skepticism. I mean, Michelle Remembers had something to do with that, right? Because in Michelle Remembers, it's kind of, this is what's happening to the babies.
Within Michelle Remembers, they used the term Church of Satan to describe this cabal of vile, terrible people doing these heinous criminal acts, saying that we sacrifice animals, that we sacrifice babies. But the whole point of the Church of Satan, what Anton LaVey founded in 1966, was liberation and embracing our strangeness, our uniqueness, the things that make us different from each other.
This is a very selfish religion. We believe in greed, we believe in selfishness, we believe in all of the lustful thoughts that motivate man because this is man's natural feeling. This is based on what man naturally would do.
Anton LaVey blended magic and science and rationality, and a lot of people, especially in those early days, found the Church of Satan uniquely liberating. For one reason or another, they found Satanism to be a celebration of their differences. It wasn't a tolerance, it was a celebration. And that's what Satanism is to us, to a Satanist.
Are you planning on training a lot of little devils? Only those that wish to become little devils. Are you married? Oh, yes. You have any little devils? Oh, yes, I have 2. Are you going to raise them as satanic kids? Certainly, but not to go around chopping people up or sacrificing human beings.
One of the things that Anton LaVey was particularly miffed about was how Michelle Remembers was marketed, that it was supposedly a true story. But Michelle Remembers obviously is so chock full of things that Satanism very clearly isn't. He said, we are an established religion protected by the Constitution of the United States. Here they were using it as if we were some international criminal organization. And that's why the Church of Satan brought a defamation suit against them in the court of law in 1981. And subsequent printings of Michelle Remembers did take out most of the references to the Church of Satan.
Hail Satan!
Hail Satan!
I don't believe that my mom is that type of person that would turn her child over to a satanic cult. It was not part of my childhood when I was a kid. I couldn't see my mom doing that. I just couldn't. As a mother, your instinct is to protect your child. But when I was 10 years old, my mom was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so she died shortly after that. When my mom passed away, her wish was that she wanted to be cremated. She wanted to have her ashes put in the crypt. This is how important this church was to her. It was important to Mom. You know, her marriage was not great, so she came here for support. In the book, Michelle said that my mother was this horrible person giving up her little girl to a satanic cult. But I don't understand why Michelle would even think that. What is wrong with her?
Why did you think that there were others who would have been through this experience?
Because when I was in that experience, I wasn't the only child. So there had to be others. And I knew this wasn't an isolated thing in just Victoria. I thought maybe there would be, you know, unrealistic 30, 60 people out there at the most, not the hundreds.
It was in 1987, and it was a conference in Richmond, Virginia. I met Dr. Posner. So we sat in this room, and Dr. Posner was up at the podium, and Michelle was off to the side there. One thing that really got me interested is Dr. Posner indicated that he thought that most of the alleged cases were a bunch of nonsense. But he then said something that I was just tremendously interested in. I'm going to tell you how to identify the real cases. So I said, man, this could be really valuable information, because I never was one of those people who believed they were all true or they were all false. There can be a middle ground in here. He would start to describe these rituals and began to talk about Michelle. But cops tend to ask a lot of questions. So the cops in the audience began to raise their hand, what about this, what about that? And I just kind of began to notice that every time somebody asked a question, Michelle never said a whole lot. And he would always answer the question. And after a while, after this happened half a dozen times, I just raised my hand. I said, I'm curious, when people ask, this all happened to Michelle, how come she doesn't give the answer, she turns to you? He just said some version of it, I don't remember his exact words, something like, well, when she first came to me, she had no conscious memory of it. And through this therapy, this story began to come out over a year or more's time. And then he recorded it, wrote it all down and documented it. And then after that, it kind of, most of it left her memory, and he was now the keeper of the story. I decided that that greatly reduced the value of what he was telling me. So I put my pen down and didn't take as many notes after that.
Every time she entered into a new area of working, everything that she had said before was totally consistent. And then when she had completed what she had done and was completely free of it, it had a ring of truth to it that I said, you know, this is not accountable from anything in the literature except from the fact that she'd been through that experience. There's no other way I can explain it.
During, I think, the lunch break, somehow it just came out. Although he didn't try to hide it, but it came out that Michelle was now his wife. And that was another factor that caused me to think, well, that's kind of an inappropriate, you know, doctor-patient kind of a thing. How did that affect this story that he's now telling?
I think Michelle loved Larry. She worshipped him.
But him and Michelle were exact opposites. And I can't figure out why Larry married her. I really can't. Would it come from needing to protect her? I know he felt a need to protect her and look after her. But marrying her is a whole different ballgame.
We always thought there was a reason why he had to marry her. He's a psychiatrist, and he crossed the line with her. And she had tied him into that lie so tightly with that book that there was no getting out of it.
We're never told that a sexual relationship begins between Michelle and the doctor at any time during therapy. But regardless of what you think about what did or didn't happen or what we're not being told, I think you can take what they say at face value in this regard and still see a wildly unethical relationship.
After they got married, everything stopped. She just wanted a normal life. I know that Oprah Winfrey called. I remember I was there at the house when I picked up the phone, and Michelle says, I don't want to talk to them.
There are thousands of men and women who are secretly worshiping the devil. If you'd like to join that audience on Thursday when we discuss Satanism, call now to reserve your seats.
The daily talk shows, people today, I don't think, realize how pervasive these opinions were.
Why, doctor, would you perform an exorcism on a patient who came to you to seek psychological help?
Well, because the patient who was referred to me by the state was a satanic ritual survivor.
At the time, these talk shows would be several times a day, and they were very well respected, but they were all feeding on the satanic panic.
Explain to us what really did happen over these 17 years.
They started a satanic cult when I was 5.
Who did?
My parents. They would either kill an animal, sometimes they would kill a baby.
A baby? Where would they get babies?
Sometimes people in the cult would have them just for this. And then when it was dead, then people in the group ate parts of it.
Dr. LeVay said, I'd love for somebody to call them on their bullshit, but they wouldn't do it because it wouldn't make good television.
In a nutshell, there was a lot of craziness. It was a fearful time. And the one big promotion of it, the one really big promotion of it, was Geraldo's 3-hour program about satanic cult crime in the United States. And of course, millions of people saw it. Millions of those people who had preconceptions believed it, and it caused a lot of harm.
These women say they speak from personal experience. They claim to be breeders, forced by covens to bear children.
Did you give birth to infants who were sacrificed?
My first 2.
Were sacrificed?
Were sacrificed. I was told it was the highest honor I could ever do as a woman, was to sacrifice my first 2.
Part of you that wants to think that these people are just flat out nuts. And some of them are, don't get me wrong. And you look at this and you say, are these people?
It is most common for the heart to be taken from the child and offered to Satan.
Today, a lot of people think that the satanic panic was sort of a joke, but a lot of conditions were created during that time for people to get more interested in the idea that evil, bad things were going on, and, one of those things that you could really hang your hat on was Satan. And it was dead serious.
The Essex County Prosecutor's Office says 26-year-old Margaret Kelly Michaels is a manipulative, sadistic child.
Preschool teacher Michaels was convicted of molesting 19 children, molesting them in bizarre ways, and in the middle of this crowded New Jersey school without any teacher or parent noticing anything.
I covered the Kelly Michaels case, and I walked into that jail, and it was so filthy, and I interviewed her, And it was terrible to see this happen to a young woman because, you know, I felt like that could have been me. I mean, I could have gone and worked in a daycare center when I was in my early 20s. It was very vicious what was done to her.
They say you inserted objects, including Lego blocks, forks, spoons, serrated knives into their anuses, vaginas,
and a
penises,
sword.
And a sword.
Yeah.
That you made children drink your urine, that you made kids take their clothes off and lick peanut butter off them. It's very hard to believe, yet the jury believed it, and not you.
No one is willing to doubt a child.
There were people who went to jail as a consequence of the satanic panic. Certainly, Michelle remembers, all of it can't be laid at the foot of one book, two people, but they sure didn't help.
They did an enormous amount of damage. They ruined people's lives. They cost them enormous amounts of money. They put misinformation out there knowingly. Tell as big a lie as possible with a straight face and just keep telling it. It works to a certain extent. It works until those of us who are paying attention stand up and challenge it.
It's a very interesting question when people talk about where this began. And so Dr. Paz's ex-wife sent me a letter. She had heard my name was out there and she knew I was looking into all of this. And she said that she could tell me and explain to me how all of this evolved and how all this came to be.
We didn't know that people had gone to prison because of the book. And that was, I think, about 1990 that I realized. It was just a terrible shock. It was just terrible. It was just terrible. But I felt that if people were in jail, it's our responsibility to do everything that we can to help those people. So anybody that came to Victoria, I would just help them the best I could.
My mom started looking into it, and she went to the house. She went to the neighbors, and she went to the school records.
I went to the registry. We found out every place she lived, where she was, went to the neighbors, and we gave that evidence to the different investigations in the states and that sort of thing.
There were very specific claims. Michelle remembers about a certain period of time, and she named the time, I believe it was 1955, where she was gone. She was held captive by these Satanists. And so we thought it should be pretty easy, you know, to see whether we can find her during that time.
We just went to the school and asked them for the yearbook. They have a collection of all the yearbooks. Her picture was right there. They said the picture was taken in the fall. Well, she was supposed to be locked up. She wasn't. Her picture was right there. There where she was, so you can't deny it.
Could this possibly have happened? Is there any truth to any part of this? You go, okay, you're describing these rituals in which you are severely treated. They cut you up with knives and they sew things onto your body that are ripped off and they knock out your teeth and they do all these things. And then miraculously, the angel Michael comes and takes all your scars away. And this is ridiculous. You know, I mean, the Virgin Mary appears and speaks to you in French? What?
Ma mère is really
It's
the Virgin
Virgin
Mary?
Mary.
She spoke in French.
Yes. And I didn't understand French, and I repeated it in French, and I still don't know French.
Well,
God
throughout the
speaks in rhyme and
experience.
Virgin Mary speaks in French.
Yes.
I remember hearing my sister on the radio broadcast, and she said, oh, but I never knew French. And it's like, yes, you did. You took it in high school, for one thing, and you won an award for it because you were so good. Plus, my grandfather spoke fluent French, and she used to converse with him. And she said, I've never spoke French ever in my life, and it just poured out of me. You know, just like lies poured out of her.
There's just a variety of things that can go on in therapy that we now know can lead people to false memories. Guided imagination is one. Using hypnosis is another one. Particular kinds of dream interpretation can lead people to false memories. Suggesting things to the patient, reinforcing the patient with, attention and interest and other kinds of rewards when the patient remembers what the therapist wants the patient to remember. And sometimes the more lurid, the better in terms of producing a reward for that patient. The Michelle Remembers story does seem to be a case that has all these ingredients that are known to lead people to think they have repressed memories they've recovered. But then there's this weird little thing about how they get married. So I don't know what to think about the sexual romantic element. That's a little different than what you see in the typical repressed memory case. But that could mean there was even greater interest on her part to do whatever she presumed her romantic interest would like to be done.
In the book, very, very often what is happening is she's telling a story and then Lawrence is interpreting it in terms of his experiences in West Africa, where he did medical missionary work for a while, and keeps mentioning that this is like those practices. We know that he witnessed some tribal ceremonies. He filmed them. But you look at it and you go, okay, I believe you saw this, but I don't believe you understood what you were looking at. But she has grabbed pieces of it and is pulling this information out of it, incorporating it into her story so that he can recognize it and then try and make the connection and put this story together, this false story of these memories. People see what they want to see. I mean, he's very Catholic, so what does he want to see? He wants to see angels, he wants to see demons, he wants to see that sort of stuff.
This book features an extraordinary number of dead babies. By the end, it's just a baby slaughterhouse. And if your patient starts seeing you again because they're feeling extreme grief over a miscarriage, and if they are telling you again and again these stories about dead babies, I would imagine that this patient could be feeling incredible unresolved guilt about the miscarriage. But Dr. Pazder is Catholic, and so he decides whatever satanic image appears to Michelle connects to something that literally physically happened to her. And I think one of the things that stories about demonic possession, stories about Satanism tell us is that there's a very clear answer for all of this, and it's God.
My dad was convinced that this was a really big thing. I really think he thought he was on some kind of mission from God. And I lost my faith completely. I saw the church as being a part of it. The church is, drinking this in and encouraging it.
We found some documentation about the fact that the book was actually subsidized by the local Catholic Church. Whether that was a local project or whether it went beyond local, I don't know. But it certainly, seemed like it was an inspirational book for Catholics, Michelle Remembers, and to the point where the church was willing to subsidize it.
The $10,000 donation is for the time, but it did work for the church.
Working for the church?
Yes.
I don't have a problem with Christianity, I have a problem with churchianity. It's a business. They're making money, right? It's got nothing to do with being devout. Most of the people involved in putting this out there, they actually are interested in three things: power, influence, and money. and they realize this is the way that they can get it. I know that I can use this information to make you fearful and pay me money. I don't care that it's a lie. I know it's a lie, but it's not important. I need your money. I'm going to get it. I need your attention. I want to get it. I need power over people. You will give it to me because you'll see me as your savior. Okay. Over and over and over again.
Ironic, I guess, is the word that some people would use, that I've been involved in many, many cases involving Catholic priests who are molesting kids. And yet I've had people tell me, devout Catholics, say, yes, you know these priests who are molesting kids, you know who they are? I said, who are they? They're Satanists who have infiltrated the Catholic Church to destroy it. Okay.
As the Satanic Panic wound down, like around 91, 92, a lot of it had to do with insurance companies, because the therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists, they were being paid, sometimes covered by insurance companies for this endless counseling. And the insurance companies started investigating. They said, we're not going to pay anymore.
Some of these patients began to realize their memories were false and that they had been planted by the psychotherapy. Some of them sued their therapists for planting false memories, and they ended up with these huge settlements.
I could not stand what was happening to my brain and the memories and the thoughts and the pictures.
Although Dr. Olson claimed that he did nothing wrong, his insurance company settled, and they paid Nadine Kuhl $2.4 million.
I didn't even know that this doctor was a fraud until recently. And it didn't happen to just us. It happened to our children, our significant others, or spouses, or ex-spouses, or family.
The issue is that counselors and therapists are leading people astray and destroying families. We need laws. We need things changed. They need to be made accountable for what they're doing.
Also, things got laughable. There was the church lady from Saturday Night Live.
Who could it be? Oh, I don't know. Satan?
All of this has to do with the changing zeitgeist, and people understood then that this was all pretty absurd and out there.
A bunch of people were falsely prosecuted. They wasted millions of dollars, police chasing after ghosts.
All right, we are ready for the jury.
Raymond Bucky and his mother Peggy were the only McMartin defendants to stand trial.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the very defendants not guilty.
Preschool teacher Michael served 5 years in jail until this year when her conviction was overturned by an appeals court that questioned the reliability of the children's testimony.
Childhood sexual abuse does happen, but there is something else going on, and that is whether some therapists are actually encouraging individuals to believe in abuse that didn't happen.
A lot of these things simply didn't happen. But the thing that really scares me is that, as people say, if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it.
We're not covering Pizzagate enough to expose the Satanism and the occult.
We have these strange allegations now of Pizzagate and things like QAnon, the idea that thousands and thousands and thousands of babies are missing. You know, it's all sort of coming up again.
QAnon, with its claim that Satan-worshiping pedophile elites are running our lives.
Oh boy, here we go again. I mean, that's exactly what, oh no, not again.
Man showed up at that pizza parlor with a gun, demanding to know more. And now this has become the center of a national debate over fake news.
I came to realize that the story is one of the most relevant topics that you could ever talk about in today's world. It's just not about satanic ritual abuse of children, but this problem of what people believe when there's no real objective professional evidence of it is an amazing thing to behold.
It's not going to go away. I used to think it was. I used to think, well, all you have to do is debunk this stuff in a rational way, and I'll just be a good journalist and I'll do that, you know. And it just happens again. This has been kind of difficult for me, to tell you the truth, to see that none of that stuff really mattered. None of what we did really seems to have made much of a difference.
We had to deal with the bride of Satan all the time. We had to deal with her. And we had to live under the shadow of that book. We had to live under the shadow of her. Once they married, we couldn't get close to him anymore. It was really hard, and I think that's why I really made an effort. I'm gonna call you every Sunday. I really, really pushed for that. During that time, the phone calls, he started changing a lot. He was kind of pulling away from her. And there's things coming up, different things that made me realize that, that he was coming around. He had said, what if it weren't true?
I was at work. My sister Tertia came out to my office and she goes, "Larry's dead." I was in shock. I was just like, I said, "What happened?" And she said, "He got up, went to the bathroom, and fell." Apparently the ambulance took a long time to get there, but he was dead anyways. He had a massive heart attack, they said. Michelle discovered that he'd kept all his pictures from his marriage to Marilyn. Michelle was really upset about that one. And she said that he was not the man I thought I married.
I went to the funeral and I connected with Michelle and I stayed with her for a few days. And then when I was leaving, this little deer came around the side of the house and it just stood there and looked at me. And it was weird. I felt like it had something to do with Larry. It's breaking me up right now. And I don't know, I just felt like it was Larry, standing there. I felt like he was asking me to look out for Michelle. So I did. I said that to myself, that I would look out for her, for him. And I've kept that promise. She's a good person. She had her life ruined. First, by whatever experience she did go through. I am convinced it's not mismemory or false memory. And then the book. It's ruined her life. She hates the book because when people see her, that's all they see. And if anybody should have blame, as much as I loved Larry, and I'm not even big on men, but I loved Larry, and he, I think, was responsible for the book.
I believe in the pain that they experienced as a child. The details of what they present, I'm not there to believe or not believe. I'm there to try and understand what they're trying to tell me of an experience. And those experiences are not simple to separate from whether that has actually happened to them or that is their way of trying to express a profound pain that they've experienced beyond their body, in their very heart and the very soul.
I always hung on to that dad that I grew up with. And I think that's what made it hurt so much, is that you hang on to what you really love. But he did take her out of my life, and that was the only good thing about his death. It was really good to have her gone. It was, I think that's when I started to feel that whole chapter was over. It wasn't one chapter, it was a book, literally.
It was more than any type of an affair, far more than that. They were both obsessed with each other. And she was in love with my husband. And maybe she saw our happiness and she wanted it for herself. But you see, you can't get that for yourself because it doesn't belong to it. It never will be yours. Because if you try to take somebody else's happiness away, everybody's going to be unhappy all the way around because it's not yours to be had. You make your own heaven or hell right here on this earth.
I think she's living in hell. Because the story has haunted my family for years. We could pretend that we're a family, but there's always that feeling of, how could you do the damage that you did by telling the story that wasn't true? If she came along and said to us, hey, I made it all up, I'm sorry, you know, then we would understand. But she hasn't. She's never apologized. She's never, nothing. Whether she made it up or whether Larry and her made it up together, I don't know. But she was able to do it. You know, she had a motive. And the motive was that she wanted Larry as her husband.
Do I hang on to you?
No, don't tell me. You can let yourself go back to me.
I keep remembering everything. Like it feels like I'm making it up. Is it still memory? Is it still more memory? Is it special feeling?
I'm not get into tonight.
I can't tell what's real anymore. I couldn't tell what was real. I couldn't tell what was real.